This hour here on Today. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is reportedly dominating discussions at the G7 summit that's being held in the Bavarian Alps in Germany. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined the discussions earlier via video link, with G7 nations committing themselves to supporting Ukraine. President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa is also in Germany to participate in two outreach sessions today as one of the invited guests. In the first one, issues of climate change, energy and health are going to be discussed. And during the second session, the summit will address advancing gender equality and food security issues. To get the latest now, what's been coming out so far at the G7 summit, let's speak to our UK correspondent, Olly Barratt, who finds himself in Bavaria in Germany for this live crossing this hour. The beautiful mountainous town of Bavaria for an update. Olly, very good afternoon to you. Besides the beautiful scenery that is around Bavaria, any good news coming out of the G7 summit?
Well, certainly G7 leaders and those outreach countries you mentioned, including South Africa, that are here, are hopeful that they can put together some efforts to show that there are ways they can work together to deal with some of the world's greatest challenges. You mentioned Volodymyr Zelensky joining proceedings earlier today as well via video link, and certainly G7 leaders hope that they have shown in their statement after that meeting that the G7 is unified when it comes to Ukraine and what needs to come next. They have said in that statement that they will support Ukraine for as long as it takes, and that means military, humanitarian and financial support. And that is partly in response to speculation coming into the summit that actually there were some divisions within the G7 about how long to support Ukraine for and whether some kind of peace deal should be pushed for. The UK and Washington were worried that France and Germany, for example, wanted to push Ukraine into some kind of peace deal that would see it give up large swathes of territory. Well, this statement seems to push back at that idea and say, as I say, that Ukraine will be supported for as long as it takes. The G7 and those outreach countries also say that they can make strides forward in terms of climate change, in terms of health commitments, strengthening commitments to the World Health Organization, for example. Food security is absolutely key. South Africa taking part in those discussions, partly based around issues caused by the Ukraine crisis and the flow of grain out of Ukraine, particularly into parts of Africa that really need it the most at the moment. The UK has said today that it's going to put forward millions of pounds of support in funding for the Ukrainian railway system so that it can start to try and get some grain out of the country via that route. But some of these issues that are being grappled with here today and yesterday and tomorrow are so incredibly complicated that you do wonder how many concrete achievements can be pointed to by leaders after the end of today's proceedings and tomorrow's proceedings that they'll actually be able to follow through on in the coming months.
Yes, I saw a report about a big deal as well being done there by the G7 nations to support low to middle income countries like South Africa in terms of investments and infrastructure development. And some analysts are saying this is a way of the G7 to counter China's growing influence in the developing world.
Absolutely, that is exactly what the point of it is. Even if G7 leaders don't really say that out loud very often, they very much see it as a rival to China's Belt and Road strategy. US President Joe Biden says it will be able to leverage $600 billion in investment for developing countries by the year 2027 into infrastructure projects, into health infrastructure, into digital and technology infrastructure as well. And that is all designed to try and increase the influence of G7 countries and counter the influence of China in those parts of the world in which China has been making strides forward with its Belt and Road program. But again, there are concerns and questions about that program. Some of the money is very much designed to come from the private sphere. It therefore isn't real yet. We also don't know exactly how much these countries will follow through on their side of the bargain when it comes to their financial commitments. It's also being pointed out that When we were in Cornwall a year ago for the G7 there reporting for eNCA, we were talking about Joe Biden's Build Back Better World programme, which is remarkably like the one that he announced yesterday with a different name. And critics would say that actually it's just a case of that not having got off the ground, and they therefore wonder whether this one will.
Yeah, just finally, the participation of those countries in the outreach discussions like South Africa, President Ramaphosa being there, how significant is it that those that are there have been invited?
It's very significant indeed, and Germany has picked the attending countries very carefully indeed. It wants to show that the major democracies that are coming alongside the G7 leaders can be involved in these discussions, can make meaningful contributions. And they also want to show that democracies around the world can be united, can speak with one voice, and can offer a counterweight to what you might describe as more authoritarian regimes around the world. That is certainly the idea. It's also, though, very much an acknowledgement of some of the issues that are being discussed here and exactly which parts of the world and which countries they are affecting. Germany definitely wanted African participation here, and that's why Senegal and South Africa have been invited, because of some of those issues around food supplies and food security and supply chain issues. But it's also a sense that Germany believes that these countries that have been invited are reliable partners, are reliable democracies with which business can be done.
Thank you very much. Olly Barratt in Germany there. In Bavaria, beautiful mountainside views there, dazzling views. One would hope that the mood inside as well is dazzling and that they'll come up with some good decisions, especially how it's going to affect places like South Africa.